The first time I died, it was not dramatic enough for the people who ruined me. There was no thunder, no blood on marble, no final speech under hospital lights. There was only the soft ping of my phone at 2:13 in the morning, a message from Mira Vale that said, "You're good with words, right? Just smooth this out for me one more time." And below it, a 12-page essay that had clearly been written by an AI that believed volunteering at a children's hospital was the same thing as administering compassion-based pediatric logistics. I should have gone back to sleep. I should have blocked her, or at least asked for my name on the work I had rebuilt for her, but I was 18, exhausted, and still stupid enough to think kindness would eventually be witnessed. So I opened the file. I fixed the false citations, erased the metallic sentences, replaced hollow paragraphs with breathing ones, folded her fake reflections into something a scholarship committee would call mature, and watched the sunrise smear itself over my desk while she slept. 3 weeks later, she stood on the auditorium stage beneath the gold banner for the Luminara University Principal Recommendation, smiled like an angel in a navy blazer, and read my words as if they had grown from her own bones. When the headmaster praised her rare moral intelligence, every teacher stood. My classmates clapped. My own advisor looked at me with disappointment because my essay, the one I had rushed after repairing hers, had been flagged as derivative. Mira had submitted a slightly altered version of my draft ahead of me, then cried convincingly when I confronted her, and by noon I was not just rejected, I was known as the jealous girl who accused the future valedictorian of plagiarism because she could not accept losing. By graduation, I had lost my recommendation, my university interview, my place in the advanced research program, and the quiet respect that had taken me 3 years to earn. By winter, when the school finally admitted in private that there had been process irregularities, it was too late for me. That night, after another useless appeal and one more email beginning with "unfortunately," I stepped into the rain outside a convenience store, saw headlights bloom white across the road, and thought not of death, but of Myra's last message. "Don't be bitter, Elian. Some people are just chosen." Then the world went silent. Then a bell rang. I woke at my desk to the same bell, not a church bell or ambulance siren, but the first period warning chime at Halewick International Academy, high and bright and cruelly ordinary. My cheek was stuck to a literature worksheet. My hand was cramped around a black gel pen. On the whiteboard, today's date was written in blue marker, March 17th, the year before everything collapsed. For 5 seconds, I thought the accident had shattered my brain and built a school-shaped hallucination from the pieces. Then my phone vibrated under my notebook, and the preview on the screen turned my stomach to ice. "Eli, emergency. Can you fix my AI essay again before lunch? It sounds weird, and Miss Danvers wants final recommendation drafts today." Again. The words sat there like a fingerprint from another life. I stared at it while the classroom shifted around me. Chairs scraping, girls laughing, the smell of cheap strawberry lip balm from the desk in front, Mr. Ansel setting up the projector, sunlight catching dust above the window. Everything was too sharp, too alive. Across the room, Mira Vale leaned against the radiator with her perfect soft curls and her pearl hair clip, acting as if she were listening to her friends while watching me from the corner of her eye. In my first life, I had smiled at that message. I had believed this was what friendship looked like when one person was needy and the other person was useful. This time, my thumb hovered over the keyboard and something inside me, something burned clean by humiliation, answered before fear could soften it. No, one word. Not sorry. Not I'm busy. Not send it and I'll look quickly. No. I pressed send and placed the phone face down. Myra's smile twitched. It was almost nothing, a tiny fracture at the corner of her mouth, but because I remembered the woman she became on that stage, it looked to me like a crack in painted porcelain. She typed back immediately. "What do you mean no?" I did not pick up the phone. Mr. Ansel began speaking about narrative voice, and I nearly laughed, because mine had just returned from the dead. By lunch, Mira had tried 5 different versions of the same trap. First came sweetness. "Don't be dramatic, Eli. You're literally the best editor in our grade." Then guilt. "I helped you with a chemistry lab poster last term, remember?" She had handed me glitter tape. Then panic. This recommendation decides everything for me. My mother will kill me if I lose it. Then the old command disguised as intimacy. You know I'd do it for you. Last came the blade. She cornered me beside the vending machines, where the hum was loud enough to blur voices, and lowered her eyes into that wounded expression teachers found irresistible. It's not like you have a real chance at the Luminera recommendation anyway. Miss Danvers already said I represent the school better. Fixing my essay doesn't hurt you. In my first life, that sentence would have sent me home shaking, but Rebirth does something strange to shame. It does not make you fearless. It makes humiliation familiar, almost boring, like a song you hate but have memorized so completely it can no longer surprise you. I looked at Myra's hand gripping her tablet. On the screen, her essay title glowed, The Algorithm of Empathy, How Service Made Me Human. I knew it. I had rebuilt that title myself after deleting the AI's original, Ethical Leadership in Humanitarian Interface Spaces. I knew the fake anecdote in paragraph 3, the invented refugee tutoring program in paragraph 6, the quote from a psychologist who did not exist, and the final line, which I had written while crying into cold tea. I learned that leadership is not the loudest voice in the room, but the hand that remains after the applause ends. She had stolen, even my grief. This time I said, then submit it as it is. Her lips parted. Excuse me? Submit it. I repeated, calm enough to scare myself. If it's your experience, your reflection, and your recommendation, it should survive without me. For 1 second, the cafeteria noise fell away. Mira searched my face for the old alien, the one who would apologize for making the air uncomfortable. She did not find her. Then she smiled, bright and poisonous. Careful. People already think you're difficult. I picked up my lunch tray. People can update their files. The first pattern break came before final period, and it was not Mira. It was Nora Chai, who had ignored me through most of high school except when she needed a pencil or wanted someone to confirm a homework deadline. She slid into the seat beside me in the library and placed a folded receipt on my notebook. You should keep records, she said. I frowned. Of what? Nora pushed the receipt closer. It was not a receipt. It was a printout from the computer lab queue showing that Mira had booked Station 12 for 7:30 that morning, printed 24 pages, cancelled, then printed again at 8:16. I was helping Mr. Iqbal clear the jammed printer, Nora said, eyes fixed on the shelves ahead. Her draft had weird placeholder text in it. Like, insert personal trauma here, but elegant. I thought it was funny until I saw your name in the file comments. My throat tightened. My name? Nora nodded. Old comments. Maybe from another document she copied. I didn't read everything. She said that too quickly, which meant she had read enough. In my first life, Nora had testified against me without knowing it. She had told the disciplinary panel she saw Mira crying outside the office and me walking away, which became proof of my cruelty. I had hated her for it. Now she looked uncomfortable, guilty before the crime had happened. Maybe the world was not repeating exactly. Maybe it had seams. I unfolded the paper and slipped it into my planner. Why are you giving me this? Nora finally looked at me. Because last month she asked me to make her debate notes sound less machine-generated. And when I said no, she told everyone I cheated on a history quiz. I didn't, but people believed it for 2 weeks. She stood before I could answer. Also, you look like you came back from a war. I don't know what that means, but don't let her make you the battlefield again. Then she left, and I sat alone among biographies of dead geniuses, my pulse drumming so loudly I almost missed the second vibration of my phone. Mira had sent the essay. Under it a message. I know you're upset. Just do the intro and conclusion. I'll forgive the attitude. I took a screenshot, backed it up to my school cloud, and wrote nothing back. That afternoon, Miss Danvers called me into the recommendation office. The room smelled of bergamot tea and polished wood, which would have been comforting if I did not remember sobbing in that same chair while Miss Danvers folded her hands and told me accusations required evidence, not emotion. She was not a villain in my first life. That almost made it worse. Villains choose cruelty. Institutions choose convenience and call it professionalism. Miss Danvers had always preferred students who made the school look generous, disciplined, and expensive. Mira did that effortlessly. I did not. I was scholarship-funded, sharp when tired, and too good at seeing the machinery behind ceremonies. Miss Danvers tapped a folder. Mira says there has been tension between you. Mira says a lot, I replied. Her brows lifted at my tone. In the old timeline, I would have straightened my posture and softened my voice. This time, I let the silence sit. Miss Danvers studied me. She claims you previously helped her polish practice essays, and now you are refusing at a critical stage. She feels blindsided. A laugh almost escaped me. Refusing free academic laundering had become emotional ambush. Did she also mention the essay was AI generated? Miss Danvers's expression changed by half a degree. That is a serious statement. It's a serious draft. Have you seen it? She sent it to me today asking me to fix it again. I placed my phone on the desk, opened the screenshot, and turned the screen toward her. I did not accuse Mira of plagiarism. Not yet. I had learned that adults often protect themselves from facts by objecting to the shape in which facts arrive. So I kept my voice flat, almost bored. I am documenting that I refused. I am not editing her recommendation essay. I am not contributing to her final submission. I am not authorizing her to use any of my previous comments, sample paragraphs, or personal anecdotes. Miss Danvers read the message. Her eyes paused on again. Then on AI essay. Elian, she said slowly, why didn't you bring this up earlier? Because in another life, I still believed help created loyalty. Because I thought being useful was safer than being excellent. Because I had not yet learned that some people do not stand on your shoulders. They kneel on your neck. I only said, because earlier I was stupid. Miss Danvers flinched. Not at the word. At the truth inside it. The next morning, Mira changed tactics in public. She arrived at school with red-rimmed eyes, no makeup except lip gloss, and a cardigan slipping off one shoulder like a wounded heroine in a drama poster. By second period, everyone had heard that I had abandoned her after promising to help. By break, the story had grown teeth. I had demanded money. I had threatened to leak her private essay. I had become jealous because Luminara scouts were attending the recommendation ceremony on Friday, and I had not been shortlisted. The last part was true in the official sense. I had not been shortlisted yet. In my first life, I had hidden in a bathroom during the ceremony because I could not bear to watch Mira ascend with my voice in her mouth. This time, I walked straight into the student council room, where the candidate portfolios were displayed for peer review, and submitted my own file to the open reserve category. The reserve category was a formality, a place for students who had missed internal deadlines or whose advisors wanted them to feel included before rejecting them gently. The secretary barely looked up. Final reserve applications close at 3. It's 2:24. You need a staff endorsement. I placed Miss Danvers's signed provisional review form on the desk. That had been the third pattern break. After our meeting, she had not apologized, but she had sent me a note. If you wish to submit independently, I will evaluate the work blind. Blind evaluation meant my name would be removed from the initial academic writing review. Myra's greatest weapon had always been atmosphere, who seemed polished, who seemed generous, who seemed like a girl a university would want in brochures. Blind review stripped the perfume off the room. The secretary took my file reluctantly. It contained my actual service records, my research reflection on language models and authorship ethics, 2 teacher references from people who had seen me work without applauding, and an essay titled, The Cost of Borrowed Voices. I had written it through the night with no AI, no borrowed anecdotes, no decorative suffering. Every sentence was mine. When I left the room, Mira was waiting in the hall. Her cardigan had returned to both shoulders. Her eyes were dry.
Cute, she said.
Reserve category. I smiled. Original category. By Thursday, the school had become a theater where everyone thought they knew the ending. Mira moved through hallways receiving sympathy, like flowers. Girls who had never spoken to me now paused mid-conversation when I passed. Boys from debate muttered that academic girls were always vicious to each other, as if ambition were a disease that only infected us in pairs. Even teachers avoided my eyes, not because they hated me, but because conflict makes cowards of comfortable people. I kept my receipts, screenshots, timestamps, printer logs from Nora, my own document history, a copy of Myra's draft metadata from the file she had stupidly sent me, showing it had been created through a browser export with no revision history until the morning she asked me to fix it. I did not hack anything. I did not need to. Myra's arrogance left doors open because, until I refused her, every door had led to me. The most dangerous moment came after school, when her mother arrived. Mrs. Vale was famous at Halewick, alumni donor, board committee member, woman with diamond earrings sharp enough to cut funding. She found me in the courtyard, where jacaranda petals had fallen across the stone like purple confetti for someone else's victory. "Ellie and Marrow," she said, using my full name the way administrators use suspension codes. A word. In my first life, Mrs. Vale had smiled at me from the front row while her daughter read my essay. Later, when the scandal broke privately, she had called my appeal unbecoming. Now she looked at me with the irritation of a rich woman forced to speak directly to a locked gate. Mira is under significant pressure. Whatever childish misunderstanding you girls have, you will not derail her future. I adjusted the strap of my bag. I'm not derailing anything. I'm standing still. Do not be clever with me. Then don't ask me to be simple. Her gaze hardened. Girls like you often mistake proximity to excellence for ownership of it. There was, the class line polished and slid between ribs. Girls like me. Scholarship girls. Quiet labor girls. Draft-fixing girls. I thought of the old me, alone under rain, wondering whether life would have been kinder if I had been born easier to believe. The anger that rose in me was cold, not hot. "Mrs. Vale," I said, "your daughter has every right to submit work she wrote. I have every right not to write it for her." A petal landed on her sleeve. She brushed it off as if it were dirt. "You will regret making enemies above your level." I looked past her to the auditorium doors, where workers were testing lights for Friday's ceremony. "I already did," I said. "That's why I changed levels." Friday arrived wearing gold. Halewick loved ceremonies, not because they celebrated achievement, but because they laundered hierarchy into inspiration. The auditorium had been transformed overnight. Velvet ropes, white orchids, a backdrop printed with Luminara University's crest, and a stage so brightly lit it made every student in the front rows look underdeveloped and guilty. The recommendation event was supposed to be simple. 3 finalists would read excerpts from their essays. The principal would announce the endorsed nominee. Visiting Luminara delegates would smile for photographs. Parents would cry. The school newsletter would call it a celebration of integrity. In the old timeline, I had watched none of it. This time, I sat in the 5th row between Nora and an empty seat no one wanted because being near me had become socially contagious. Nora wore her hair in a severe bun and whispered, "She's looking at you." I did not turn. "Let her." "Are you scared?" "Yes." Nora blinked, surprised by the honesty. I kept my eyes on the stage. But I know the difference between fear and instruction now. Backstage, Mira appeared between curtains in a cream blazer, her curls pinned with pearls, face luminous beneath the lights. She looked perfect. That was the problem with girls like Mira. Perfection made people lazy. They stopped checking seams. Miss Danvers stood near the podium with a tablet pressed to her chest. Our eyes met once. I could not read her expression. Then Principal Harcourt approached the microphone and began speaking about excellence, service, leadership, and other words adults used when they wanted teenagers to compete politely for rationed opportunity. My heart hammered so hard my ribs hurt, not because I had set a trap, but because I had refused to become one. There is a difference. A trap requires deception. A boundary simply lets people meet the consequences they were already walking toward. The first finalist read about designing low-cost water filters. He was nervous, but his hands shook in rhythm with the truth, and the audience warmed to him. The second spoke about translating legal forms for migrant families with her father. Her voice cracked once, and everyone leaned forward. Then Mira stepped up. The applause was enormous before she even began, swelling from students, parents, teachers, board members, all the people who had invested in the idea of her. She placed both hands on the podium and looked out over us. For a second, her gaze found mine. It said, "Watch me survive you." Then she began. "When I first entered the pediatric hospice volunteer program, I believed service was a form of giving. I now understand it as a technology of listening." Nora made a strangled sound beside me. The Luminera delegates looked down at their programs. Miss Danvers lowered her tablet slightly. Mira continued, and the essay unfolded exactly as I remembered, except without my repairs. It was worse than bad. It was beautifully dead. It drifted from hospice to refugee tutoring to environmental leadership without any human transition, described a 7-year-old patient named Matteo who, according to the same paragraph, suffered from leukemia, asthma, and post-traumatic educational displacement, quoted a non-existent Dr. Alina Vero on empathy latency, and claimed Mira learned humility when a child asked her whether algorithms could pray. The audience did not collapse all at once. That would have been too merciful. Confusion moved like a stain. A teacher tilted her head. A parent stopped smiling. One delegate whispered to another. Mira sensed it and brightened her voice, which only made the words sound more artificial. I watched her fingers tighten on the paper. She had expected my edits to appear somehow, as if I were a function of the universe rather than a girl who had finally closed the file. Halfway through, Principal Harcourt's smile froze. By the final paragraph, when Mira declared that leadership was the optimization of compassionate presence within excellence-driven ecosystems, even the orchids looked embarrassed. Then the stage screen flickered. It was supposed to display the Luminera crest during readings, but someone had switched the source to the candidate verification dashboard. Later, people would argue about whether it had been an accident. Mr. Iqbal would say the auditorium computer had been connected to the review tablet through the wrong input. Nora would say nothing, though I noticed her staring very hard at her shoes. I had not asked anyone to do it. That mattered to me, even if it would not matter to Mira. The screen showed the 3 finalists' submission statuses. Beside the water filter essay, verified document history, advisor comments, source check clean. Beside the legal translation essay, verified document history, source check clean. Beside Myra's name, a red triangle pulsed. Revision history insufficient. Authorship interview required. Citation verification failed. 7 sources not found. Potential synthetic generation markers. High. A sound moved through the auditorium that I had never heard before. Not a gasp, not a laugh, but the collective inhale of a room realizing its favorite story might have been misprinted. Mira stopped reading. Her mouth remained open around a sentence about moral architecture. She turned to the screen, then to Principal Harcourt, then to Miss Danvers. For one wild second, I thought she might confess. Instead, she did what she had always done. She looked for me. "Elian," she said into the microphone. My name cracked across the speakers. Every head turned. She did this. There it was, the old timeline reaching for my throat. In my first life, an accusation from Mira had become weather. This time, before fear could spread, Miss Danvers walked to the podium and removed the microphone from Myra's hand. "The verification process is standard for all candidates," she said. Her voice shook, but it held. "Please step aside." Mira did not move. She sabotaged my file. She refused to help me. She's been jealous for months. Miss Danvers looked at me then, and the room followed her gaze. My heart went still. She could choose convenience again. She could save the school embarrassment by feeding me to the story. Instead, she said, refusing to edit another student's essay is not sabotage. The applause did not come. Real justice rarely arrives with applause. That is something ceremonies lie about. What came first was noise. Whispers, chairs creaking, a board member standing too quickly, Mrs. Vale demanding to know why private review data was visible, Principal Harcourt murmuring for calm, while looking as if calm had resigned by email. Mira stood under the lights, no longer angelic, just exposed and young and furious. I should have felt triumph. I had imagined it in my first life during the bitter months after graduation. Mira humiliated, Mira cornered, Mira finally unable to cry her way through consequence. But watching her on stage, I felt something sharper and less satisfying. I felt the size of the machine around us. Yes, Mira had used me. Yes, she had lied. But a whole school had trained her to believe that polish mattered more than process, that a beautiful performance could digest invisible labor and call it merit. A whole audience had clapped before hearing her speak because they had already decided which girl deserved to sound profound. Miss Danvers announced a temporary recess. The curtain half closed, badly, leaving Mira visible from the knees down. Her cream trousers trembled. Nora whispered, "Are you okay?" I said, "No," she nodded. "Good. I'd be worried if you were." I almost laughed. Around us, students stared at their phones, already converting institutional failure into gossip. I stood not to leave, but because my legs needed proof they belonged to me. At the aisle, Mrs. Vale blocked my path. Up close, her face was pale beneath expensive makeup. "What did you give them?" she hissed. "Nothing they couldn't verify." "You vindictive little." "Careful," I said softly. "There are microphones everywhere today." Her mouth snapped shut. Behind her, one of the Luminera delegates had heard enough to look interested. Mrs. Vale stepped aside. The authorship interview happened in the green room while the audience waited under the fiction of technical difficulties. I know because I was called in, not as an accuser, but as a witness. That word tasted strange. In my first life, I had been a defendant in every room, even when no formal charge existed. This time, Miss Danvers sat at the table with two Luminera delegates, Principal Harcourt, Mira, Mrs. Vale, and a laptop open to the submitted essay. A glass of water sat untouched near Myra's hand. She would not look at it. One delegate, Professor Sato, had silver hair clipped at her jaw and the kind of calm that made lies feel overdressed. She asked Mira to explain the hospice program described in the essay. Mira said it had been a composite reflection. Professor Sato asked for the supervising coordinator's name. Mira said records were confidential. Professor Sato asked about Dr. Alina Vero. Mira said she had found the quotation in an online article. Professor Sato turned the laptop around. "We cannot locate the article, the journal, or the individual. Could you summarize the argument in your own words?" Mira blinked rapidly. Mrs. Vale interrupted twice. Principal Harcourt tried to soften the language. Miss Danvers grew quieter with every answer, perhaps realizing that professionalism without courage is just decoration. Then Professor Sato asked the question that split the room. "Who helped you write this essay?" Myra's eyes slid to me. I felt the old fear rise, not because I had done wrong, but because I knew how easily a girl like me could be blamed for being adjacent to wrong. "Elian edited some practice drafts," Mira said. "She changed things. She knows my voice." "Did she edit this submission?" "She refused at the last minute." "That is not my question." Myra's cheeks flushed. "No," Professor Sato looked at me. "Did you edit this submission?" I opened my folder and placed the screenshot on the table. "No," she asked. I refused. I added the document history from my own essay, my reserve submission receipt, and a short written statement I had prepared because Rebirth had made me many things, but not careless. I also revoked permission for any prior comments or sample paragraphs of mine to be used in her final work. Mrs. Vale laughed once, ugly and disbelieving. "Permission? You are children." Professor Sato looked at her. "Authorship begins before adulthood, Mrs. Vale." Mira broke after that, but not beautifully. She did not sob into her hands like the wrong girls in school dramas. She became practical and vicious, which was the closest thing to honest I had ever seen her. "Everyone uses tools," she snapped. "Everyone gets help. Elian acts pure because she likes being miserable. She loved fixing things for me. She liked feeling needed." The room went silent in a different way. Not because the statement was false, but because part of it was true. That was Myra's talent. She never invented chains from nothing. She found the links you had already wrapped around yourself and pulled. In my first life, I had loved being needed. I had mistaken exhaustion for importance. I had built a self out of rescue missions because asking for anything felt greedy. I had let Mira borrow my mind because I did not yet believe it deserved a door. I looked at her across the table, at the girl who had cost me one life and was now trying to cost me another, and I felt the final thread between us burn away. "You're right," I said. Myra's mouth opened, thrown off balance. I did like feeling needed. That's why it worked. But needing someone isn't the same as owning them. Professor Sato's pen paused. Miss Danvers looked down. I kept going because this was not only evidence now, it was an exorcism. You asked me to make your essay sound human because you didn't want to do human work. You asked me to carry your panic because you didn't want to feel consequences. You called it friendship because friendship sounds better than unpaid labor. I'm done donating my voice to people who clap for themselves with it. Myra's eyes filled, real tears this time. You think this makes you better than me? No, I said. It makes me separate from you. That hurt her more than superiority would have. Girls like Mira could survive envy. Separation was starvation. The ceremony resumed 46 minutes later, though by then it had stopped being a ceremony and become an autopsy with floral arrangements. Principal Harcourt returned to the microphone looking 10 years older and announced that one finalist had withdrawn from consideration pending review. Withdrawn. That word made Mrs. Vale's donation history visible in the air. Still, it was enough. Mira did not return to the stage. The remaining finalists sat stiffly while the principal praised transparency as if transparency had not dragged itself into the auditorium through a faulty input cable. Then came the final pattern break, my name. The review committee has also evaluated reserve submissions, Principal Harcourt said, shuffling a paper as murmurs rose. In light of the academic writing scores, verified service records, and the strength of her independent essay, the committee has invited Elian Marrow to present a brief excerpt before final endorsement. For a moment, I did not understand the sentence. Nora grabbed my wrist. That's you. My body moved before my brain did. The walk to the stage felt longer than my whole first life. Every face turned toward me, some curious, some hostile, some ashamed, some simply hungry for the next dramatic scene. I passed Miss Danvers at the stairs. She whispered, "You don't have to." In another timeline, not having to would have meant hiding. This time it meant choice. I stepped to the podium. The microphone smelled faintly of Myra's perfume. I adjusted it lower. My hands shook, and because I was tired of pretending steadiness was the price of being believed, I let them. My essay is called The Cost of Borrowed Voices, I began. It is not about technology as a monster. Tools do not erase integrity. People do. Systems do, when they reward the appearance of reflection more than reflection itself. The room changed, not softened, focused. I read only 2 paragraphs, because I did not want their admiration badly enough to drown them in proof. I read about tutoring younger students who used translation software to express ideas teachers had mistaken for laziness, about how AI could widen access when used transparently, and about the quiet violence of making invisible people polish visible people's dreams. I ended with a line I had written for myself at 4 a.m. A borrowed voice can win a room, but only an owned voice can survive after the room empties. This time, when silence followed, it did not crush me. It listened. The endorsement went to the water filter finalist. That is important. In lesser stories, I would have taken Myra's crown and worn it while everyone cheered. But real victory, the kind that does not rot in your hands, is sometimes smaller and cleaner than revenge. I did not need the principal's recommendation to prove Mira had stolen from me. I needed my future returned to the realm of possibility. Professor Sato approached me after the ceremony near the side doors, where parents were pretending not to stare. Your essay was strong, she said. Your file was late. Yes. Your record is uneven in places. Also yes. Her mouth tilted, almost a smile. But your authorship is clear, and your research reflection is more sophisticated than most finalist submissions. Luminera has an independent ethics fellowship. It does not require the principal's nomination. I encourage you to apply. In my first life, no delegate had spoken to me except to ask whether I understood the consequences of making unsupported claims. This time, one handed me a card. I took it carefully, as if it might vanish if gripped too hard. Across the lobby, Mira stood with her mother and Principal Harcourt, face blotched, pearls still shining in her hair like tiny moons over a battlefield. Students orbited at a distance, eager but afraid to be seen as eager. Mira caught me looking. For a second, we were back in the cafeteria beside the vending machines, before the stage, before the collapse, before Consequence had a public address system. Her expression twisted. I expected hatred. Instead, I saw disbelief. She had never truly imagined a world where I walked away holding something she could not snatch by needing it louder. I slipped Professor Sato's card into my blazer pocket and turned toward the exit. But stories do not end when the auditorium empties. They mutate in hallways, inboxes, boardrooms, and group chats with names like Senior Queens and Luminara Fallout. By Monday, Halewick had become a school pretending to investigate itself. An email went to families announcing a strengthened authorship policy, as if policy had failed rather than preference. Students were required to attend an assembly on ethical AI use. Teachers received emergency training on document history. The school paper ran a careful article titled "Recommendation Ceremony Disrupted by Verification Error," which made it sound like the projector had committed academic misconduct. Mira took 3 days of absence. Mrs. Vale threatened legal action, then withdrew from the board committee to focus on family. People kept asking me whether I was happy. The question irritated me because it revealed what they thought had happened. They thought revenge was a dessert served cold on a stage. They did not understand that exposure is not the opposite of harm. It is harm becoming visible. I still woke up each morning with memories from a life no one else had lived. The rain, the headlights, the appeal emails, the ache of being disbelieved so completely I began to distrust my own reflection. I still flinched when my phone buzzed after midnight. I still imagined my old future lying somewhere behind me like a body that would never be buried. Happiness was too simple a word. Relief was closer. Grief was closer still. Freedom was the closest, but even freedom had blisters. Nora became my ally by accident and my friend by repetition. She never asked for the whole story, which may be why I eventually told her pieces of it. Not the rebirth part. I was not ready to sound insane in a school where sanity was measured by presentation slides. But I told her I had spent too long fixing Myra's work, that I had confused usefulness with safety, that refusing felt like stepping off a roof and discovering ground only after falling. Nora listened without trying to decorate my pain. "My mother does that," she said one afternoon as we sat behind the gym eating convenience store rice balls because the cafeteria had started feeling like a courtroom. Turns everyone around her into evidence that she's suffering. If you help, she says it proves you love her. If you stop, she says it proves you never did. I looked at Nora, really looked, and realized she had not joined me because she loved justice in the abstract. She had joined because she knew the shape of that cage. That became another lesson of my second life. Not everyone who stays silent is your enemy. Some are still measuring the lock. We started studying together after school. She was ruthless with math and terrible at metaphors. I was the opposite. We made a decent organism. When gossip flared, she stepped on it with precise boredom. When someone asked whether I had planned the whole projector thing, Nora said, "Yes, Elian controls HDMI cables with her trauma." It was the first time I laughed so hard I cried without being sad. Miss Danvers asked me to meet 2 weeks after the ceremony. I almost refused. The old part of me wanted adults to earn access after failing me, but the newer part understood that accountability sometimes begins as an awkward email with too many semicolons. She chose the small conference room instead of her office, perhaps to avoid the memory of our earlier conversation. On the table sat my reserve essay with notes in the margins. "I owe you an apology," she said. I did not help her by saying it was fine. It was not fine. It had never been fine. Not in this life, and certainly not in the one that still lived like a bruise under my skin. Miss Danvers folded her hands, unfolded them, and tried again. I allowed Myra's reputation to influence how I interpreted your concerns. I treated your refusal as conflict instead of a boundary. I should have asked better questions earlier. I looked at the comments on my essay because direct apology can be harder to face than direct cruelty. Thank you for saying that. She nodded, accepting the smallness of my response. Then she surprised me. I also reviewed prior peer editing submissions. Several of Myra's practice essays contain passages that overlap with work you submitted in workshop journals. My pulse moved into my throat. What happens now? Formally, prior drafts are harder to adjudicate. Informally, I will write a statement for any university application explaining that concerns about your authorship were reviewed and cleared. The room blurred slightly. In my first life, I had begged for a sentence like that until begging became another humiliation. Now it arrived not as salvation, but as paperwork someone should have done long ago. Miss Danvers slid an envelope toward me. And I will serve as a reference if you want one. I understand if you don't. I touched the envelope but did not open it. I'll think about it. That, too, was freedom, not grabbing every offered repair just because I had once been broken. Mira returned on a Thursday because, of course, she did not choose Monday, when everyone expected a dramatic entrance. She came in halfway through biology, wearing no pearls, hair straightened, face bare except for concealer under her eyes. The room went rigid. Even Mr. Sala stopped mid-sentence while explaining cellular respiration, which felt thematically rude. Mira handed him a late slip and took the only empty seat, 3 rows behind me. I could feel her presence like cold breath on the back of my neck. For 30 minutes, nothing happened. Then a folded note landed near my elbow. Nora reached for it, but I stopped her. The paper contained 6 words. Meet me after class. Please. Please. Mira had used that word before, but always as theater. This one looked ugly, pressed too hard into the page. After class, I did not meet her alone. I stood near the open lab door with Nora visible down the hall and Mr. Sala still packing slides inside. Mira noticed and laughed weakly. You think I'm going to attack you? I think I'm done making private rooms easy for you. She swallowed. Up close, she looked smaller without audience lighting. My mother wants me to transfer. I said nothing. Luminera blacklisted me from the recommendation program. Still nothing. People keep sending me screenshots of things I said about them. Everyone's acting like I'm some monster. There it was again. Consequence translated into persecution. I should have walked away. Instead, curiosity held me. Why did you ask me to meet? Mira looked at the floor. I want you to tell them you helped me more than you said. I almost admired the audacity. No, her head snapped up. Not to blame you. Just to make it look less like I used AI completely. Like collaboration gone wrong. So, you want me to step into the fire and call it warmth. You don't understand what my life is like now. The old Elian would have heard pain and reached for tools. The new me heard pain and did not confuse it with debt. I understand exactly what it feels like when your future collapses because someone else needed a cleaner story. Mira flinched.
Mine collapsed publicly.
Mine collapsed alone. For once, she had no answer. The strangest part of revenge is how quickly people invite you to become cruel enough to justify what they did to you. After Mira returned, I had opportunities. So many. A junior student sent me a video of Mira crying in the stairwell and asked whether to post it. I told her to delete it. Someone from debate offered to leak Myra's old group chat messages if I wanted full justice. I said justice that needs teenagers doxxed is usually hunger wearing a costume. Even Nora, who believed in decisive endings, asked once, "Are you sure you don't want her to feel a bit more of it?" I thought of the rain. I thought of lying in another timeline's road. My whole life narrowed to what Mira had taken and what no one had returned. I thought of how easy it would be to spend my second life still orbiting her, just from the opposite direction. No, I said. She can be consequences problem now. That did not mean forgiveness. People love asking harmed girls whether they forgive, because forgiveness makes a room feel clean without anyone scrubbing it. I did not forgive Mira. Not then. Maybe not ever. Forgiveness, I decided, was not a graduation requirement. What I did was refuse to keep authoring myself in response to her. I applied to the Luminera Ethics Fellowship. I rewrote my personal statement 4 times and left every scar visible enough to have meaning, but not so exposed that strangers could grade the wound. I started a peer workshop called Original Draft, where students could get feedback without surrendering ownership. Miss Danvers helped secure a classroom, but did not run it. That mattered. The room filled slowly at first. Scholarship kids, ESL students, anxious perfectionists. One athlete who wrote brilliant essays in sentence fragments because no one had taught him paragraphs could hold breath. We made rules.
No ghostwriting. No spam.
AI tools allowed only with disclosure and reflection. Every draft kept its author's name at the top. The fellowship interview took place online in the school media room, which had a green screen, 2 broken tripods, and a motivational poster that said failure is feedback. I turned the poster around before logging in because there are limits to irony. Professor Sato appeared on screen with 2 other reviewers. They asked hard questions, not the decorative kind adults use to let impressive students perform humility. They asked how schools could distinguish unequal access from misconduct, whether banning AI would punish disabled students who used assistive tools, whether authorship was a product, a process, or a relationship. In my first life, interviews had terrified me because I believed every answer had to prove I was not the girl people accused me of being. This time, I answered like someone building a bridge while walking across it. I said transparency mattered more than purity. I said students needed to learn process evidence the same way they learn citations. I said invisible labor often hides behind excellence, especially for girls trained to be helpful and quiet. I did not mention Mira by name until they asked what had motivated my project. Then I chose my words carefully. I was part of a harmful dynamic where my editing became someone else's authorship. I participated in it before I resisted it. That complicity taught me why policies need to protect not only institutions from fraud, but students from being consumed by each other's ambition. The reviewers took notes. One asked, "Do you see yourself primarily as a victim of that dynamic?" I considered lying because victim is a word people either worship or distrust. I see myself as someone responsible for what I do next, I said. Victimhood explains the injury. It doesn't write the future. When the interview ended, I sat alone in the media room with my palms flat on the desk, breathing through a wave of memory so strong I could smell rain. Then my phone buzzed. For 1 second, fear. Then I saw Nora's message. "If you say I bombed, I'm reporting you for emotional plagiarism, because that's my line." I laughed until the green screen behind me trembled. While I waited for the fellowship result, the school tried to absorb me into its redemption narrative. Principal Harcourt invited me to speak on a panel about student integrity in the age of artificial intelligence. I asked whether Mira had been invited.
He coughed.
Given the circumstances, that may not be appropriate. Then don't frame it as a student issue, I said. Frame it as a school issue. The invitation disappeared. A week later, the newsletter praised Halewick's proactive authorship reforms and included a photograph of students typing earnestly in the library. I was not in it. Nora circled the omission with red pen and wrote, "Cowards, but make it glossy." I found that I did not care as much as I expected. Recognition from a machine that had nearly crushed me was not the same thing as repair. Meanwhile, Original Draft grew too large for one classroom. Students came with essays, scholarship statements, debate speeches, even apology letters they were too proud to send. The work was messy and alive. A Year 10 boy admitted he used AI because English felt like trying to sing underwater. A girl from my economics class confessed she had been rewriting her older brother's university applications for money. 2 international students taught us how translation software changed tone across languages. We argued. We learned. We built checklists, show version history, label assistance, separate brainstorming from composition, keep a reflection log, never let anyone pressure you to make their work indistinguishable from yours. I realized then that Mira had not stolen my love of words. She had only trapped it in her mirror for a while. Myra's final attempt came quietly, which made it more dangerous. She sent me an email from a new address because I had blocked her number. The subject line was, "I'm sorry." I stared at it for 10 minutes before opening it. Not because I wanted reconciliation, but because curiosity is apparently harder to kill than trust. The message was long, and for the first 2 paragraphs, almost good. She admitted she had relied on me unfairly. She admitted the AI essay was hers, not mine. She admitted she panicked because her mother treated every achievement as rent she owed for being born. Then the shape changed. But you know I'm not the only one who did this. You know the school pushed us into it. You know you could have warned me before letting me go on stage. You wanted me destroyed because you were angry. I understand why, but I hope one day you can admit we both hurt each other. I sat very still. There it was, dressed better than before, but still the same theft. The attempt to make mutuality out of harm. We both hurt each other. I refused to be used. She called that injury. I told the truth. She called that violence. In my first life, I might have written a 6-page reply proving my pain point by point. This time, I wrote 4 sentences. I accept the parts of your apology where you take responsibility. I do not accept blame for the consequences of work you submitted under your name. I hope you become someone who can tell the difference between being exposed and being harmed. Do not contact me again. I read it twice, removed the word please, and sent it. Then I printed the email, not for revenge, but because records had become my way of telling my past self. I believe you. The fellowship acceptance arrived on a rainy evening because the universe has a cruel sense of symmetry, but occasionally decent timing. I was at home in my smallest sweater, helping my little sister assemble a model volcano that looked less like a volcano than a frosted crime scene, when my inbox refreshed. Congratulations. For a moment, I could not move. My sister, who is 12 and allergic to emotional subtlety, leaned over my shoulder and screamed loud enough to rattle the baking soda. My mother ran in holding a wooden spoon like a weapon. My father thought someone had fallen. Then everyone was hugging me and I was laughing and crying and trying to explain that it was not a full university offer, only a summer ethics fellowship with a research stipend and mentorship track, except only sounded absurd even as I said it. In my first life, rain had been the last thing I felt. In this one, it tapped the kitchen window while my family danced around a papier-mâché volcano. Later, when the house quieted, I stood by the sink and opened the fellowship portal again to make sure the message had not vanished. There was my name, Elian Marrow. Not Myra's name. Not a borrowed voice.
Mine.
The stipend would help with application fees. The mentorship would strengthen my university file. The research project could become something bigger than a survival story. I pressed my fingers to the screen, foolishly gentle. Then I whispered the words I had needed someone to say in the old timeline. You weren't too late. Spring tilted toward exams, and with it came a new kind of attention. Some students admired me, which was uncomfortable. Some resented me, which was familiar. A few tried to turn me into an anti-AI saint, which annoyed me most of all. I use grammar tools, I told them. I use translation checks. I use search engines. The issue was never technology existing. The issue was pretending output was experience and treating people like invisible plugins. That line spread around school faster than anything useful I had said, usually misquoted as don't treat friends like plugins.
Fine.
Let them have it. Original Draft hosted its final session before exams in the art room because we had outgrown every normal space. Someone brought biscuits. Nora made a sign-up sheet so aggressive it looked legally binding. Miss Danvers visited for 10 minutes, stayed 40, and left with 3 pages of student suggestions for the new policy. At the end, the Year 10 boy who once said English felt underwater read a paragraph about his grandfather teaching him to repair radios. It was clumsy and repetitive, and so alive it made the room go quiet. He looked up, embarrassed. Is it bad? Yes, Nora said immediately. His face fell. She slid the paper back. But it's yours, so now we can fix it. Everyone laughed, including him. I watched the scene with an ache that was not grief exactly. Maybe this was what my first life had been reaching for before Mira intercepted it. Not applause, not perfection, but a room where unfinished people could remain authors of themselves. Graduation came without Mira. Her family transferred her to a private program overseas after spring exams. though rumors continued to embroider the fact until she had supposedly joined a convent, sued a university, married a tech founder, and been recruited by a secret debate academy in Switzerland. I believed none of it. She sent no final message. I was grateful. On the morning of graduation, I pinned my hair myself and wore a pale blue dress under my gown because in my first life, I had chosen black to look smaller. My mother cried before we left the house. My father pretended the car's air conditioning was making his eyes water. Nora arrived late, cursed at her heels, and somehow looked like she had bullied elegance into cooperating. The ceremony was exactly as overproduced as all Halewick ceremonies, but this time I did not sit beneath the lights feeling erased. When Principal Harcourt read my name for the Ethics Fellowship recognition, his smile strained under the weight of institutional memory. Good. Let it build muscle. Miss Danvers clapped from the staff row. Professor Sato had sent a note that morning. Remember, the goal is not to be the student who survived a scandal, but the scholar who studied the conditions that made it possible. I had copied that sentence into my planner. When I crossed the stage, I did not look for Mira in the audience. That felt like the final exam of my second life, and I passed. I looked at my family. I looked at Nora. I looked at the empty aisle beyond the last row, bright with open doors. After graduation, I visited the road where my first life ended. I had avoided it for months, even though in this timeline nothing had happened there except traffic and rainwater and people buying convenience store noodles after tutoring. Memory does not care what timeline a street belongs to. It keeps its own maps. I went alone near sunset, wearing sneakers and carrying the acceptance packet for Luminara's summer fellowship in my backpack. The convenience store sign buzzed. Cars hissed over damp asphalt. For a while, I stood under the awning and watched the crosswalk light change from red to green to red again. I expected revelation, maybe tears, maybe the ghost of the girl I had been stepping out from between parked cars. Instead, I felt my phone heavy in my pocket and realized I was waiting for a message that would never come. Not from Mira. From myself. The self who died believing no one would ever know she had told the truth. I closed my eyes and gave her the only ceremony I could. I told her about Nora, about Professor Sato's card, about original draft, about the day Miss Danvers apologized badly, but sincerely, about the fellowship email and my sister screaming beside a collapsing volcano, about how Mira fell, yes, but more importantly, how I did not climb onto the stage just to become her replacement. The crosswalk turned green. I stepped off the curb, not because I wanted to reenact anything, but because living requires crossing places that once ended you. Halfway across, headlights approached at a normal speed and stopped at a normal distance. The driver waved me on. Such a small mercy. Such an ordinary world. I reached the other side and breathed. That summer at Luminara, I learned that institutions are less like castles than ecosystems, beautiful from far away, crawling with habits underneath. The fellowship cohort included coders, poets, activists, exhausted scholarship students, and one former debate champion who admitted she used to generate rebuttals in bathroom stalls between rounds. Nobody was pure. That was what made the work honest. Professor Sato assigned us to research authorship evidence in educational settings, and I poured myself into interviews with students who had been accused unfairly and students who had cheated because the system rewarded final polish over visible process. I heard stories that made mine feel both singular and common. A dyslexic student punished for using speech to text without disclosure because no one had taught her disclosure language. A first-generation applicant whose cousin rewrote his essay until his own life sounded like a scholarship brochure written by a stranger. A wealthy boy whose admissions consultant had drafted so much of his statement that he could not explain his own metaphor in an interview. The problem was not one girl with pearl clips. Mira had been a symptom with excellent posture. I wrote that sentence in my research journal, then crossed it out because it sounded meaner than necessary, then wrote it again because accuracy sometimes has teeth. At night, in the dorm, I drafted a policy model called Process Integrity Mapping, which required students to submit not only final work, but a short trail of choices, brainstorming sources, assistance received, tool use, revision notes, and a reflection on what changed. Not surveillance. Not punishment. A map. Proof that thought had traveled. The final fellowship presentation was held in a glass lecture hall overlooking the city. I wore the same navy blazer from Halewick, not because I loved it, but because I wanted to overwrite the fabric. My slide deck was simple. No dramatic photos, no screenshots of Mira, no scandal bait. Just questions, data, student quotes used with permission, and one blank slide titled, "Who Gets Believed Before Evidence Appears?" When I reached that slide, I paused long enough for the audience to become aware of itself. Then I told them, not the whole rebirth truth, but the public truth that fit this world. I had once been asked to fix an essay that was not mine. When I refused, the refusal was treated as cruelty. When the work failed, the person who submitted it tried to make me responsible for her exposure. The lesson I took from that, I said, is not that students are evil or AI is evil or ambition is evil. The lesson is that any system obsessed with polished outcomes will eventually outsource honesty to the least protected person in the room. Professor Sato's face did not change, but I saw her pen stop moving. That was her version of applause. I presented the model. I answered questions. I did not shake. At the reception afterward, a dean asked whether I planned to study education policy. I said maybe. Another asked whether I had considered law. I said maybe. For the first time, maybe did not sound like uncertainty. It sounded like doors. Near the end of summer, I received a package with no return address. Nora was visiting that day, sprawled across my floor with a fellowship brochure over her face, complaining that all universities used photos of students laughing at laptops as if laptops were comedians. The package sat on my desk between us. Bomb, she asked. Too light. Glitter revenge? Too tasteful. Inside was a small box containing a pearl hair clip and a note.
No greeting. No apology.
Just one sentence. I don't know who I am without people expecting me to be impressive. Nora read it over my shoulder and went quiet. The pearl clip lay in the box like a tooth from another creature. For a while, I felt nothing. Then, unexpectedly, pity. Not the warm kind. The distant kind you feel looking at a house built beautifully on a sinkhole. Are you going to answer? Nora asked. I closed the box. No, are you going to keep it? I thought about throwing it away, burning it, mailing it to Mrs. Vale with a policy pamphlet. Instead, I put it in the back of my desk drawer, not as a relic of Mira, but as evidence of a different lesson. Sometimes the person who harms you is also trapped, and sometimes that changes nothing about the door you close. She needs someone, Nora said. Probably. But not you. I smiled faintly. Look at you. Character development. Nora threw the brochure at me. The pearl clip remained in the drawer, quiet and powerless. The first real test of the new version of me came not from Mira, but from a girl named Celine Park, who arrived at Original Draft 2 days after the pearl clip package with a scholarship statement so polished it reflected nothing. Celine was year 11, terrifyingly neat, the kind of student who highlighted her highlights, and she sat across from me with both hands folded while Nora skimmed the first page and made a face usually reserved for spoiled milk. The essay claimed Celine had discovered her passion for biomedical engineering after witnessing the inefficiency of human fragility in a clinical environment, which turned out, after 15 minutes of questioning, to mean her grandmother had broken her hip. Celine had used AI because English was her third language and because her parents, who ran a dry cleaning shop 6 days a week, kept saying the scholarship committee would not have patience for awkward sentences. Awkward sounds poor, Celine whispered, and the room changed around that sentence. There it was again, the ugly little engine beneath so many perfect essays. Not laziness, but fear wearing someone else's grammar. In my first life, I might have grabbed her draft and fixed it beautifully, thinking I was saving her. That day, I pushed the laptop back. Tell me about your grandmother's kitchen, I said. Celine stared as if I had asked for a blood sample. The kitchen?
Yes.
Before the hospital. Before engineering. What do you remember? She spoke for 30 minutes about steam fogging the windows, a radio playing old ballads, her grandmother cutting pears with a knife so thin it looked ceremonial, the fall, the ambulance, the metal screws, the way a walker changed the geometry of their apartment. None of it sounded polished. All of it sounded true. We built the essay from there, not by making Celine sound like a brochure, but by helping her trust that precise memory could carry intelligence better than imported grandeur. When she left, she bowed twice and apologized for taking too much time. Nora waited until the door shut and said, "If you apologize for existing in my workshop, I will assign you extra confidence." Celine laughed from the hallway. I sat there with my pen still in my hand, shaken by how close help could stand to harm. The difference was not whether the final essay improved.
It did.
The difference was whether the author became more present or disappeared more efficiently. That became the sentence I wrote at the top of our workshop rules the next morning. Good feedback returns the writer to the work. A week before applications opened, Principal Harcourt asked me to join a policy meeting with staff, parents, and student representatives. I expected a performance, and I was not disappointed. The meeting began with pastries, which is how schools signal that difficult truths are expected to behave politely. Mrs. Vale was absent, but her shadow sat in every expensive chair. A parent from the board argued that strict AI detection would protect the school's reputation. A computer science teacher explained, with increasing despair, that detectors were unreliable and often punished multilingual students. An English teacher admitted she had no idea how to evaluate process without doubling her workload. A father in a tailored suit suggested the school simply ban all AI and require handwritten essays. Nora, who had come as student council's reluctant ethics representative, muttered, "Yes, and perhaps we can churn our own butter before calculus." I kicked her ankle under the table. When Harcourt finally asked for my view, I looked at the adults and felt the old temptation to make myself digestible. Soft voice. Grateful tone. Surviving student offers constructive feedback. Instead, I opened my notebook. "You keep asking how to catch students," I said. "That is the wrong first question. Ask what kind of work makes honesty possible." The room tightened. I continued before anyone could rescue themselves with a committee phrase. If every major opportunity depends on a single perfect essay, students will hide the messy parts. If help is shameful, they will disguise it. If polish is rewarded more than development, the richest students will buy polish, and the most useful students will be pressured to provide it for free. A policy that only searches for cheaters will miss the system producing them. Nobody clapped. Good. Clapping would have meant they were finished thinking. Miss Danvers wrote quickly. Mr. Iqbal nodded, like someone finally hearing a machine described from the inside. The board parent frowned, but not dismissively. By the end, the draft policy included process logs, declared assistance, teacher conferences, oral authorship checks, and explicit language that students could not be required or pressured to edit another student's assessed work. It was not revolutionary. It would not save everyone. But when I saw that last line typed into the document, I had to look away. Somewhere in another life, a girl had waited for an adult to write a sentence that protected her. In this one, I helped write it myself. When university applications opened, my personal statement did not begin with trauma. That was the temptation, of course. Pain makes a strong hook. Admissions committees love resilience as long as it arrives edited, grateful, and not too accusatory. I wrote 3 drafts that began with the stage collapse, the AI essay, the public accusation. They were compelling. They were also cages. In the 4th draft, I began with the Year 10 boy reading about radio repair an original draft, his paragraph messy and alive, the room waiting not to judge but to help him make it clearer without making it less his. From there, I wrote about language, power, authorship, and the ethics of assistance. I wrote about being harmed, yes, but not as the whole architecture of me. Miss Danvers reviewed it and wrote in the margin, "This sounds like you." Nora reviewed it and wrote, "Needs one sharper sentence near the end. Make them nervous." My sister reviewed it and drew a volcano in the corner. I submitted it before midnight with full process notes attached, partly because the application allowed it and partly because I enjoyed the symbolism. Then I closed my laptop.
No frantic checking.
No waiting for permission to breathe. Outside, rain began again, softer this time, the kind that makes streets shine without swallowing them. I made tea and watched one full episode of a terrible drama where the villainess solved everything by slapping people at banquets. Amateur, I told the screen. My sister told me I was weird. She was correct. Months later, when the acceptance arrived, it was not from the principal's recommendation route. It was from Luminera's interdisciplinary program in ethics, technology, and public policy, with a merit scholarship attached and an invitation to continue research with Professor Sato. I read the letter in the school library because I had arrived early for an original draft alumni session and thought I was only clearing spam. Nora found me sitting between shelves, not crying, not laughing, just staring. "Good news or felony?" she asked. I turned the screen. She screamed first, naturally. Miss Danvers came running, because librarians only pretend to dislike drama. Students gathered. Someone started clapping, then more joined, and for one dangerous second, the sound pulled me back to the auditorium where Mira had stood under gold lights with my words in her mouth. My chest tightened. Then I looked down at the letter again. My name. My program. My work. The applause did not own me. It could not transform me into someone else's proof. I stood and bowed dramatically because Nora yelled, "Accept praise like a normal person," and I have never responded well to unreasonable demands. Later, alone in the bathroom, I cried so hard my mascara surrendered. Not because acceptance fixed the old life. Nothing fixed it. But because this life had not required me to become flawless to continue. It had only required me to stop abandoning myself. Before leaving Halewick for good, I was asked to record a short message for future students about academic integrity. The request came from Principal Harcourt, which made Nora wheeze for almost a minute. I agreed on the condition that the school could not edit it beyond audio cleanup without my approval. To my surprise, they accepted. I stood in the media room in front of the green screen, the same motivational poster now replaced by a student-made sign reading, "Drafts are evidence of thinking." I looked into the camera and did not mention Mira. I did not need to. "You will be told that success is a stage," I said. "A ranking, a recommendation, a polished essay, a perfect answer delivered under lights. But most of your life happens before the stage, in drafts no one sees, in choices no one claps for, in the moment you decide whether your work will still belong to you when it becomes impressive. Use tools. Ask for help. Give help. But do not confuse support with substitution, and do not let anyone convince you that your voice is less valuable because it is still unfinished. The world will offer you many borrowed voices. Some will sound smoother than yours. Some will win rooms faster than yours. Let them. The goal is not to sound impressive for 10 minutes. The goal is to recognize yourself after the applause ends." When the recording light turned off, Mr. Iqbal, who had been operating the camera, wiped his eyes and claimed allergies. It was June. Indoors. I let him have the lie. On my last day, I emptied my locker and found a sticky note stuck behind the shelf, folded so tightly it had become almost square. It was from the old timeline and not from it, a note I had written months before Rebirth and forgotten in both lives. "Remember to ask Mira for the volunteer coordinator's email." Such a small, innocent sentence. Such a perfect fossil. I sat on the floor in the empty corridor and held it for a long time. That girl had not known she was building a cage. She had only wanted to be helpful, prepared, good. I used to hate her for that. I used to think survival required despising the version of me who had been fooled. But sitting there with graduation banners half removed and summer light striping the tiles, I felt tenderness for her so sudden it hurt. She had done her best with the tools she had. She had loved language. She had wanted friendship. She had mistaken being needed for being safe because no one had taught her safety could exist without usefulness. I folded the note and placed it in my planner beside Professor Sato's first card. Not all evidence belonged in a case file. Some belonged in a memorial. If you are waiting for me to say Mira learned her lesson, I cannot. I do not know. Maybe she became kinder. Maybe she became better at hiding. Maybe somewhere overseas she stood before another committee with a cleaner draft and a softer story. People do not transform just because consequences arrive. Sometimes they only change costumes. What I know is this. She did not get my voice again. She did not get my recommendation, my silence, my apology, or my second life. The stage that was built to crown her became the place where I returned myself to myself. Not because everyone believed me instantly, not because the system suddenly became fair, but because I refused the first request.
No.
One word can be a locked door. One word can be a bridge burning behind you. One word can be a girl crawling out of a future that buried her and choosing, with shaking hands, not to fix the essay. I used to think my life changed when Myra's recommendation collapsed on stage. It did not. That was only the visible part, the scene people gossiped about, the moment the room finally inhaled. My life changed earlier, in first period, with my cheeks still marked by a worksheet and the dead timeline ringing in my ears, when a message arrived asking me to save someone who planned to stand on me, and for the first time in any life, I saved myself.